now and start the presentation. So thank you for coming. This is Coalition Building 101 in the Advocacy Workshop series with Bike Pittsburgh. I wanted to start off with introductions from everybody. If everybody could just say your name, your neighborhood, what you want to get out of this coalition building workshop, and then what is something you've learned recently, hopefully something new that you've learned. I'll start. I'm Anna Tang. I live in Friendship. I'd like to get out of this just like what you all want to get out of it, and then hopefully if you want to, I want to hear what you want to learn, and then something that I learned recently. I actually learned recently that there's this cool like greenish, naturally greenish emerald lake in Forbes State Forest, which is near Ohiopyle, and I would like to go check it out. So yeah. Andrew, do you want to go next?
My name is Andrew. I am in Greenfield, and what did I learn today? I learned that the Greenfield Bridge is closing for a month, and that was a surprise to me. And what else is the next question is, what is something I learned recently? Something in addition to that?
Sure. Or what did you learn or like get out of the presentation today too?
Oh, I see what you said. Oh, what do I want to learn today and what have I learned? I get it now. What I was thinking, this might be a helpful thing because when I first signed up with the intention of being a bike advocate, when Anna first mentioned it, I didn't find any other bikers in Greenfield, so I got involved in what organizations already existed in Greenfield and thought maybe I could just advocate for bikes within that, and so it seems like it changed my perspective to being like just a narrow focus of being a bike advocate to suddenly like kind of reverse engineered. Like suddenly I care more about the local neighborhood stuff, and the bike stuff is almost incidental. So I think that there's ways of combining those organizations or letting those organizations utilize each other's strengths.
Great. Catherine?
Hello, I'm also in Greenfield, and something that I learned today is hyper local. I live right in front of the cemetery in Greenfield, and I take walks in there every day because it's very like pandemic safe. Nobody else is in there who is alive, and it's kind of wooded, but I came across this marker that I'd never seen before. I just thought it was a regular tree, but it's actually like a plastic tree and literally says like tree right on it, and it was totally like hidden in plain sight. So that was kind of interesting, but not like, I guess, really useful really to anybody, even myself. But I guess it's an observation, not something I learned, but there you go. And what I'm hoping to get out of this is like Andrew, well, like I met Andrew and George very recently, thanks to you, Anna, as you know, from attending like the last one of these sessions. So I've already gotten so much out of this series by sort of like being a part of the initial bike group here in Greenfield. This particular session I'm interested in because coalition building I don't think is my personal strength. So I'm interested in hearing like just everything on this topic.
Cool. Leah?
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm in Shadyside. And I guess I've been thinking about coalitions because in Shadyside we're starting to think about Oakworth Avenue again, and there's been some sort of talk like we need to build coalitions and not just have the bikers advocating for a bike path or for improvements. So I feel like that's not necessarily something I know how to do in terms of like thinking about people who are in a pretty different demographic or in a different area. And then another thing is also one place that I would say did actually do some coalition building was or saw somebody else maybe do some coalition building was around, there was a development project where I guess it was Pittsburghers for Public Transit that was kind of driving that, or there were a bunch of groups that were involved in it, and we just kind of like, I think, stepped up to support them to some extent, even though it was kind of related to what we were interested in, and I don't know, kind of not. So that was something like that was really like seeing a coalition come together in a good way, and I'd love to see more of that. Something I learned recently, I guess this is kind of a plug, but I learned last week that there's a group of people who are doing weekly bike rides for like leftists, but like not like, you know, like people who are interested in like progressive politics and stuff. And they're doing a Saturday bike ride in different neighborhoods. So I think they've only done 2 so far. So I learned about that last week and it was cool. I went.
Nice.
Do you post that information, Leah?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find it. I'll post it in a few minutes.
Okay. Thanks. George?
Yeah, hi. My name's George. I also live in the Greenfield neighborhood. I'm not super familiar with coalition building. I would like to learn about it as it relates to maybe in my immediate neighborhood. How could I get my neighbors to agree on it's not called a neighbor way, but a slow street, and try to see, you know, how can you get all the stakeholders, and even some stakeholders that don't think that they might be a part of that, to agree to that, you know, people that you don't even see walking around that are just really car centric and that sort of thing. So how to reach out to those folks. What is something that I learned recently? The Greenfield Bridge is actually called the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge. So that's actually the official name of it. Yeah. I think there's a placard on it that says that, and I did like some tangential article to the thing about it being closed, and then they're like, yeah, a lot of people know it's actually called the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge, but we just refer to it as the Greenfield Bridge.
Nice.
And yeah, there we go.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. So you can see we're going to go over these things under coalition building. So we're going to identify your issues, make a strategy, identify groups, stay in touch, and set expectations. And then we will be out of here. So first off is just defining what is a coalition. So a coalition is a group of specific people and or organizations that come together for the purpose of gaining more influence and power than the individual organizations or people can get on their own. Coalitions can be, permanent or temporary. They can be single or multi-issue. They can be geographically defined, you know, like just in your neighborhood. Maybe you expand a little bit further out into your district. Maybe you want the coalition to go as far as your entire city. Maybe you one day grow so big that it encompasses your entire state or the whole country or nation. You know, coalitions can come in all sizes. I think for this one, though, it'll most likely just be your neighborhood, district, or city. Possibly state for some legislations, maybe. They're usually they can be limited to a certain constituencies, you know, like you're just going to talk about biking, you're just going to talk about walking, or maybe like you're just going to talk to mobility groups or something like that, or you just want to talk about food scarcity or how that relates. So it can be limited, or it can be anything, any combination of those. So it could be a permanent, geographically defined constituency on biking, which is, you know, in theory what you're doing. Or it could just be temporary. Like you just want to, all you want to do is form a coalition to get one bike lane in, and that's literally all you want to do. And then you're going to just disband after that. So that could also be a temporary thing for a coalition. So why do you want to form a coalition? So there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages to doing this. So advantages, coalitions have power in numbers. So whatever you do, you can win together what you can't do alone. So for example, that would be like your groups, you want to put in a bike lane, but you obviously can't do that because you don't have the resources, you don't have the expertise, you're not engineers. So you want to form a coalition, you know, with the city so that you can actually implement your goal. Another advantage are complex issues usually require large numbers of people and many resources to win. So that's another advantage, building your organization out. So like the more people you include, the larger your reach is for your messaging. Make your work more effective. So you're not just keeping it insular and just amongst yourselves. You're talking and expanding who and what gets to learn about what you're doing, which makes your work more effective. Expanding the understanding and experience of your group. So what other groups might be experts in, they can bring that to your group and make your group stronger in those areas that you lack. You can share resources. So most bike ped groups don't have funding, but maybe your community group or a different nonprofit has some money that they could throw at helping your campaign, printing things off, or doing something else. Maybe you don't have a graphic designer amongst you, but you need a graphic designer, and you can think of somebody who could bring that resource or skill into your group. It can also, another advantage is it can overcome barriers of culture and history. So, you know, a lot of you are new to Pittsburgh. So like what coalition could you, or not coalition, what group or network could you look to form a coalition with that could bring in outside perspectives than what the people who are already in your group might bring? And you know, what else? I just put that down there so you could think of like their other advantages. Obviously with advantages come disadvantages. So forming coalitions, it does take up a lot of time to like establish and think about who you want to form relationships with. Sometimes there are too many compromises that happen. If there's, you know, too many cooks in the kitchen or something like that, where everybody kind of wants to get to a certain place, but then in order to do that, a lot of people might have to compromise what they are actually working on. Because you would be in a group, sometimes like if you're spearheading it, you can't take the credit. The whole coalition has to take the credit for it. So that might be a disadvantage in some people's eyes. There can be, whoops, sorry. There can be inequity in power. So like sometimes, you know, the loudest person in the room might get, you know, the loudest voice, or their experience or something might come to the top. And also by associating with other people or organizations, your group may also be associated with the negative aspects of those groups, you know, whatever that may be. That can be a disadvantage of being in a coalition. So those are just some things to think about like why would you even want to form a coalition to begin with. Next is just getting started. So identifying your issue. So before you start reaching out to every last person or group you can think of, you know, like right now you just want to sign off and you're like, okay, I can think of like 25 organizations to email right now. I'm just going to introduce it. You need to be a little bit more strategic than just reaching out to everybody that you know. Like I was thinking about this, it's like, just don't be desperate. Don't act desperate and just kind of, you know, email, like BCC every single person in your email, you know, your contact list. You need to back up a little bit and identify your issue. So yeah, you need to think about like, what do you want to work on? What are your goals? And what do you want to accomplish with this issue? So I'll put an example up in a minute, but your issue or campaign goals will help you think about who you need to talk to. Leah, you will like my example. It's specific to Shady Side. So general example, issue. So this is just in general, like for a group. So you want to make Shadyside a safer area for people to bike and walk. So what do you want to work on? You want to work on getting bike lanes on the major throughways and fix broken or missing sidewalks. What are your particular goals? Identifying streets and areas that can be converted into safe and better bike areas to bike and walk, and make the bikeability and walkability of the neighborhood better, especially for most vulnerable users. What do you want to accomplish with this issue? You want to make the area safer for everyone who uses the streets. And here is an example for like a specific campaign. So this, like you were
Just do all my work for me, Anna.
I was thinking that. I was like, well, it'll get the ball rolling. So you want to get bike lanes on Ellsworth Avenue and Shadyside. So what do you want to work on? You literally want to work on getting a bike lane, specifically a bike lane on Ellsworth Avenue between Negley Avenue and Neville Street. What are your particular goals? Your goals would be to identify organizations in the neighborhood and on the street who are for and possibly against the project. You also want to reach out and form relationships with the businesses and residents and the council person who support this project. And then what do you want to accomplish with this issue? You want to accomplish, sorry, the bottom of my screen. We want to accomplish the bike network or you want to complete the bike network in this area and help reduce the stigma around bike commuting and the use of Ellsworth. You know, obviously this is just an example. It's not specifically what, you know, Shadyside Complete Streets or Shadyside wants to accomplish, but I just wanted to put up an example. So don't, this is not what Leia's group has actually written. I just wanted to throw it out there. Just an example. Does anybody have questions so far? Okay. So after you identify your issue, you want to make a strategy. So you want to ask yourself, who has the power to make the change you need to achieve your goal for your issue? So I'm just going to say that one more time because this is very, very important, is to identify who has the power to make the change you need to achieve your goal for your issue. So for Ellsworth, who would have the power to make the change to put a bike lane in on that street? You know, that would be like who you need to target and make your strategy around. Leia, do you have a question? You can answer. Sure.
I mean, I think the two groups or people are, you need support from DOMI and you need support from your council person. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I think they have the ability to make that decision.
Yeah. I was also even thinking, you know, like as I was going through this exercise, that it's also the engineers, because if it's not feasible engineering wise, then like you wouldn't be able to, like, you know, actually go through with your plan, which is where, like, you know, having these coalitions comes in to being a positive thing. So these targets will help you identify the most important people and or groups that you will need to reach out to. You can separate your targets into primary, secondary, and public. So primary are specific people who have the power to make the change you seek. And then I kind of put in there like who has the power to halt your efforts, because that's also important. So like a loud group of opposition can also have the power to stop a project from happening. A secondary target would be the people who have influence on the primary targets. I suppose like who has the power to halt that would also be a good question. And then public would be the segments of the public you need to address. So who in the public do you need to also talk to, like schools or churches and different things like that. So the next thing, in addition to the strategizing, is identifying groups and people to work with. So you want to make a list of specific people, groups, and organizations or entities that can help you win your issues. So I just kind of listed here like a bunch of categories that might be useful for you as you're thinking through like your issues or who you want to form a coalition with. So it could be a specific person at the city. It doesn't necessarily have to be all of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, but it could just be like Cassandra, who's the principal planner on biking and walking issues. Maybe it's like your neighborhood planner. Maybe it's the director, Karina, or somebody else, so like that could be a category. It could be your council person. Your council person has great sway in what happens and what doesn't happen in your neighborhood, and your council person is on your side as far as like being your advocate at the city. So think about forming a coalition with your council person. Municipal governance, I was put this in there for anybody who lives outside of the city. You might want to form a relationship with groups, with your local municipal government. Everyone is set up differently, but like finding a seat on that or just forming a relationship with those people. You could look to forming coalitions with state road inspectors. So, the city isn't all just made up of city roads. Some of them are state, some of them are PennDOT roads. So who's in charge of biking at the state level that controls, or you could make a relationship with so you understand the PennDOT system. Local community groups. So, like Andrew, you said that you joined like your local community group, and you formed a coalition with them essentially. So like you understand like how they work, what they're about. And if you ever needed to like ask them for help or like call on them, like that is one like coalition or relationship that has formed. You could also go beyond a community group, like businesses in your area, church groups, and there's a lot of other people. So I just wanted to open this up for you all to kind of share like who else you could think of in your neighborhood that might be good groups or places to think of building coalitions. And while we're also on this topic, just to branch out and make sure that you're also forming coalitions with like groups that help with like all ages and abilities. So like, is there the ADA community, or is there like youth and like an elder population? So just making sure everybody is included. Does anybody have any other ideas of places to reach out to, or has this spurred any thoughts?
Well, what about how do you like find these groups? Like I just Googled Greenfield community just to see if there was a group. But is there like a list somewhere?
The city does have a list of registered community organizations, which I don't know if there's any in Greenfield yet. I think you have to apply for it. So I think that might be a dead end for you, but like reaching out to like Bike Pittsburgh, or like what you did, like Googling, like it's not rocket scientist, rocket science. So like you did exactly what I actually find Facebook is a really good way of searching groups too. Because a lot of neighborhood or local community groups don't have the resources to have a website, but they'll make a Facebook group because it's easy.
Well, I was also wondering if it's a reasonable thing to, I wouldn't go knocking on doors, but when there's something specific like the sidewalk, and it affects necessarily the person who lives on that street, is there maybe like nextdoor.com or something? Can you just like reach out to strangers, like individuals, and say, what do you think of this sidewalk? What can we do about the sidewalk?
Right.
Like maybe kind of not exactly a group, but a block, a list of people.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing, something similar that I was thinking is I feel like everybody has the neighbor who knows everyone. So,
the nebulator.
yeah, I was going to say that. I was like, the one, but I mean, like I have like neighbors who have been in the neighborhood for like 30, 40 years. And and I feel like if you know one of them and you get them on their side, on your side, maybe they can talk things up with other people or like point you in a good direction.
Yeah, I would even, I'm just going to go back a slide and say like, you know, those like neighbors can also be like, be a specific person that you want to put in your secondary target, because there are specific people who have influence probably on the primary target because they've been there for so long. They hold that like,
yeah, the neighbor who happens to be friends with your council person or whatever.
This is Pittsburgh after all.
So Anna, can you talk a little bit more, if it's not too much of a sidetrack, about registering as a community group with the city? Like, I mean, our Greenfield group might be too early on for that, but like, what are the pros and cons of that?
I could answer some of that. The Registered Community Association, there's a website I could share here. There are some requirements for it, and there's like a legal status. You have to have a, I forget what that 501c or whatever that is. That I know that the Greenfield Community Association has talked as if they were this close to becoming that, and had every intention of doing so, but they never. When I was last on the website for the city, it did not list Greenfield, so apparently they've not gone through with that, but they were imminently planning to. But yeah, it sounds like there's like that it's not simple. That it's not just anybody can like making a Facebook group. It's not like you can just declare yourself one.
Okay. So even if obviously like there's requirements for it, but would there be any cons to ever registering as one of these groups once the group was mature enough to apply for that status?
I think a con would be that like you do have to follow like the rules of being a registered community, a registered ROC, I think it is a registered, I forget what it stands for, but to be one of these community, you know, so then you do have to follow their rules. So say you wanted to go off and do like a rogue demonstration or something, I don't know if you could do that, but like there are limitations and certain amounts of like rule following that you have to do. It's not as free form.
I remember looking at it and you have to have like bylaws and like a governance like method. It can't be just like, hey, I'm the most active person, so now I'm president of the group. Which
Yeah, and I do
is
think
what
it
often
has
happens.
to go beyond like just one topic. So like, you know, like community groups usually function on like, you know, housing, development, land use, community, green space, construction, traffic, you know, like it's not just on like biking and walking. It's a lot of other issues. And I think that might also be a hindrance for like a bike ped group becoming an ROC.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you.
George, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
I was just going to say, you know, like what you're talking about before, like reaching out to people next door, or possibly even, I think I belong to this Buy Nothing group on Facebook that's super hyper local.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think that, I mean, this is probably a little presumptuous, but there might be a good majority of people that would support something like that. So even just shooting a flare off and being like, maybe even just giving away something for free, and then just like, oh, and also, you know, but I don't know. I mean, it just seems like I agree. I think it was Andrew that mentioned like these Facebook groups, or you had mentioned, you know, that they seem to, there's all kinds of Facebook groups for everything, and just reaching out to those folks. But I was thinking the school might be a big one, and the parents. I was just thinking in terms of like maybe at some point establishing some kind of bike to school event, you know, and getting parents on board with that, and you just create this annual thing every year where, you know, like, hey kids, I know they had that, I've heard of that like in Portland, like where they have like these bike to school days, and it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of kids and their parents all in a train riding bikes to school. So
Yeah, that's great. I know they tried to do that one time at the Dilworth Academy, I believe, over in the Highland Park, Larimer area. And I remember the day they did that. There were so many people, you know, scooting to work and rollerblading and biking and walking. You know, it was really fun. So that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And also
Oh,
like forming a coalition with the school.
right. Yeah. So yeah, that could be one of them.
Mm-hmm. Were you going to say something else? I think I cut you off.
I mean, sometimes I think of just guerrilla style marketing. I mean, because there's going to be so many stakeholders if you're trying to build this coalition. It's not just bicycle, you know, cyclists, pedestrians. It's the people on these one-wheel apparatus and the electric scooters, and you know, all these. I mean, these are all part of the same, you know, box. And just like, you know, trying to flag somebody down that's on one of those things, or I don't know, like it's actually they go pretty fast. So it's hard to it's hard to flag them down, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
I think Leia, didn't you and Andrew do that for your bike ride one time?
Yeah, we were trying to recruit people for the group really, and we were having a group bike ride, and we just stood on the corner. Was it just the two of us? Maybe it was, but we just stood on the corner of Morewood and Ellsworth, which is like probably our biggest bicycling hot spot, and just handed people flyers. And it was, I think, I would say we got a pretty small return rate on that, but like we gave a bunch of flyers out. I'm still like, maybe someday, like we'll be trying to get the news out about something and people will be like, oh yeah, we got your flyer like a year ago. So we'll see. But I'm probably going to do it again at some point. So I would call it a success.
Mm-hmm.
We're setting up a booth that's like thinking about starting a bicycle pedestrian group, you know, the table, change my mind, and see what kind of responses you get.
Yeah. I'll say like from Bike Pittsburgh's perspective, like having you all is one way that we form a coalition, you know, so like we know that we have all of you out there in each neighborhood that we can call on, and you know, like my literal job is to make sure that we're keeping, you know, good relationships with everybody, and also helping, you know, like with the work that and goals that each of your groups want to do. So that is like another coalition, you know, way to build a coalition too. So I just wanted to say, like, make a list and check it twice. Christmas is on my mind. So make a general list and a specific list. We kind of already were starting to discuss this, but I think it's really helpful to have two lists. So a general list can be an evergreen list of groups and organizations that you want to have permanent relationships with and communications with, like your community group, the city, or Bike Pittsburgh. This is kind of what I think we've mostly been talking about so far. You know, like, can you form a formal relationship with the school, with your council person, you know, with whatever businesses or coffee shops, you know, are in your neighborhood, or whoever else you think is important to just have these like everlasting relationships with. And then have a specific list. So this is more geared towards the exact issue or campaign that you're working on. So it can be generated for each project, and they might not last beyond the life of the project that you're working on. So if you're working, like, for example, on a PennDOT road, maybe you don't need to talk to the PennDOT person because you only have that one road going through your neighborhood. And after that project's completed, you will probably never have to work with this person again. So that list could probably be deleted or saved in an archive or something like that. But it's different from like just your general list of people that you always want to include. So there's two types of lists. And then, so examples. We already discussed this, but just to go back to the example with Ellsworth. So your primary targets could be your council person, Karina Ricks, who is the director at DOMI, and engineers. We already discussed like who else could be involved as a primary target. A primary target could also be your nebby neighbors, the people who are the naysayers, because they're the ones whose minds you have to change in order to get the support to get a project to go forward. So it's not always like the highest person, it's not always the mayor or like the director of a department or something like that. It could be like this one vocal support or vocal opposer in your neighborhood, who really needs to be like have their mind not changed, but like they're the ones who need to get on board with the project, or who you might need to talk to.
They need to be silenced.
Yeah. Or just brought around to some, you might not change their mind, but maybe you can get them to a point of neutrality where they can at least see how it could benefit them or like the greater community, or how it fits into like the overall plan or something like that. Secondary targets could be, the vocal residents. I don't know why I put that in there twice. Excuse me. Community leaders. And you want to find like specific names of the people. So like you can't just put, like when you're coming up with these lists, like try to find exact names of people, like Connie, who is the president of the traffic committee at my community group, or something like that. Just so you have that list and their contact information. And then public targets, which we had already discussed, like your council person, and people can be on more than one list. So like your council person, you always want that person to just know what you are working on. Schools, like, and churches, or any other community group, can be different groups that you want to target. So next, you definitely want to reach out and stay in touch. So relationships with your targets can be as formal or as informal as you'd like. So, probably a relationship that you'll have with your council person will feel more formal, like you'll always refer to them as like council person Strasburger, or, council person this, that, or the other. But it could be informal in that, like, you see them on the street and you can just wave and say hi and like chit chat. You can send emails, so like you can really make your relationship with these people, whatever it is that will be accessible for like what your needs are. You want to make sure though that you keep consistent communication, and just being like upfront about what that means. So like, are you sending them quarterly emails? Are you calling them once a month? Like whatever it is, just making sure that you're keeping that consistent communication. An example is that every year I ask bike ped groups to submit capital budget letters to their council person with their requests. And so like now that people have been sending this in every year for probably the past 5 years, it's become regular, and council persons usually ask like, when can I expect your letter this year? And so that kind of regular communication is key to like keeping that relationship going, or that coalition between the two parties. Making sure that you're keeping everyone involved with the issues, specifically like if you're doing a campaign, will help maintain the collaboration, decision-making abilities, and influence over your topic. So if you are trying to get, like a bike lane on Greenfield Avenue, like making sure that you're updating people who are involved, you're asking for opinions, sending regular updates. I know it's a frustration, like when the city announces something and then they'll wait like 5 months and then they'll send an update and you're like, well, what happened during those 5 months? Like there was no updates, there was no communication, like nothing was happening. And to be a good partner, you want to make sure that you are reaching out with some regularity, and also letting people know like when to expect your next communication. And make it manageable too for yourself. Like if once a month is too much, like make it whatever you can handle. Whoops, sorry. And make sure that someone in your group is in charge of doing this. So that is key, is making sure like you've delegated in your group, like who can do this reaching out. It doesn't have to be one person. It could be a bunch of people, like, like Andrew already has established, like some sort of influence with the community group. George, you might have like a connection to a bike shop or something. you know, like whatever it is, like just making sure that someone in your group is delegated with reaching out to the specific people who you want to be in your coalition. And so these are like some examples of how to involve people with your coalition. So inviting folks to your monthly meetings, like it would be great if people who you're trying to work with just came to your meetings. Like invite your council person or their chief of staff to your meetings so that they can take notes and hear what you're working on. You could invite yourself to join other people's monthly meetings, you know, like going to your community groups meetings and speaking about the issues that you have there. You know, that's another way to join in and take interest in what they're doing as well. So it's not just a one-way street. Asking your networks, like how can I help you? You know, like asking the city, can I do a bike count for our area? Will that help you? Like, is that something that I can offer as our coalition? Can, you know, like whatever it is, like you can just ask them what they need and you can like offer to help. Other things are like tagging and sharing what others are working on social media. I know that sounds like kind of low bar, but for some groups that really means a lot, you know, like Friends of the Riverfront, for example, like sharing their content, or even just liking it and keeping up on what they're doing shows like interest, and it just shows like good relationship building. Sending thank you notes, a thank you goes really far. It seems easy, but it is a personal extra touch that will really help with a relationship. And you could ask your coalition people to be a guest speaker, like at your meetings or just at any event or something that you're hosting. Like if you're doing, say, a group ride or a walkthrough of your neighborhood, ask them if they are experts in something, or just ask them to come along or be a spokesperson or something. And there's a lot of other things, but I thought, again, we could have a little discussion on this. So like, what else could you think of ways to like involve people who might be in your coalition? Anybody? George?
I like the idea of having somebody as a guest speaker. I think that's a great one. I'm trying to blank though.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other ideas or thoughts about this? Like how to involve a coalition with the work that you're doing? You could start like a newsletter and send it out. You know, like whatever. I think the bike counts are a really good one. Like the city used to hold annual bike counts and they would ask all the bike ped groups to take part in it. They don't do that anymore, but I think that like for projects, especially like it for neighborhoods, like having data on things is like really useful, and the city needs help with that.
You know, that's something that I've actually been thinking about recently. And for some reason, because I see so many cyclists, and I don't think people believe that there's that many up on my street. And I thought that we would have to do one of those, like, they look like rubber to me, like the street counters. But it sounds like we can do just like a hard count, right? Like you can just sit out there for a certain number of hours on Saturday morning and literally count the people, and the city accepts that as data.
Yeah, I think the only thing to check on is that like for data, like, and to have it like comparable year after year, like I'm not sure, because they haven't done it in maybe like 3 or 4 years, like if they want it done on like certain days so it's like consistent, or certain times, or like certain locations, just to have that consistency in the data. That would be like something to check with the city. Or it's been so long, maybe they just want to kind of like start from scratch and just like revamp it.
They don't do that anymore, do they? Because I volunteered, I think when I first moved here, and I did like some hard counts on a couple different corners, but I don't
Yeah.
remember if I did that through like PGH or who that was with.
Yeah. I know the city did it like in maybe like 3 years ago, and I think they did it like Liberty and like the Strip District or downtown. But I have the count papers from doing that. And so like, there's no reason why you also couldn't just do it on your own and say like, this is what I did, and just have an annual count like within your group. Because if you're just doing it and you do it consistently, then like that data is valid.
Gotcha.
It's just like if you want to submit it like for the city to use, they might have slightly different rubric or something like that. Leah or Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I guess I could add that getting involved in the projects of another group that are not related to our mission specifically, at least gets the goodwill that they know we're allies. So if there's some other organization in the neighborhood doing something else and they need help doing it, just to be cognizant of that. Not I mean, because you want to be vested in your community anyway. You want to be recognized. And you share the same goal. You're trying to make your neighborhood livable. And so if you show that you're vested in the community for whatever else they're doing, whether it's putting on a parade for the Veterans Day or something, or helping them put on, let's say like in Greenfield, they have the Greenfield Glide or the Christmas Parade or something. If you volunteer for that sort of thing, that people on those committees will recognize you. And then when you come to them saying, we're putting on a bike ride, and they'll remember that you helped them. And it's not even that cynical. It's just that you become a group that's got shared experience and have a shared goal.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Like the garbage Olympics are coming up, and their community groups are always looking for people to like just go out and pick up trash, or just like have it. And it's like, I think another way of thinking about coalition building too is like, think of it as just like a friendship. It's like the types of friends that you have, the ones that only show up when there's free food. It's like you have your friends that like only ask for money or want to borrow something, and then like when you need something they're never there. So it's like you want to just be like that good friend, that good neighbor. Pittsburgh is Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, so keep that friendly vibe going. Leah?
Yeah, I think you kind of said this, but I think the idea of having overlap between your group and other groups, like not like say like I feel like a group ideally will have a few different people, and so like maybe I'm also in the public transit group, and somebody's also in the school group, and somebody else is also in like the clean air group. So I think like having, not saying like everybody's a member of everything, but say like, oh, like everybody's kind of, and not to say like go out and do this, but you're probably already in multiple groups, or maybe somebody's interested in it anyway. But really taking advantage of those overlaps.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Or like even like, work with your work or something. Like I know some groups, they have people who also work at universities, and like just trying to make, your place of work or something like that more bike friendly or more walkable, like just inviting coworkers to take a walk at lunchtime, and just like making even just like the idea of taking a walk like normalized or something like that. That's a way to form like very low hanging fruit coalitions, you could say. So kind of going back to that, like you can make them as informal or formal as you want. Council person seems really formal, but like asking a friend to just take a walk and look at things a little bit differently is like pretty informal. I keep hitting my arrow on my screen. So one of the last things to talk about is setting expectations. And this is really good and important so that nobody feels, overwhelmed or wondering what's the relationship is going to be like, or like what you're asking of them. So try to be as crystal clear about your expectations as possible. So if it's about putting in a bike lane, or, working with your council person, just saying like, hey, we want to be crystal clear that we just want to have a working relationship with you, so that when issues do come up, we know who to contact in your office, and we will be sending you an annual capital budget letter request. And all that we want from you is to know how we can help you and, you know, what kind of a relationship you would also like out of it. So you also want to listen to what they have to say too. So it's not just a one-way street, but I think we've had a good discussion around that topic. So you're being a good friend. You're not just being a nebby neighbor. And coalition building should be transformative and not just transactional. So, you know, when you are building a coalition, you know, at the end of the day, you want to become a better organization for having these relationships, and you want to have a better community and society at large. And you're not just, you know, like handing something off, like you're not just raking somebody's yard and then leaving and going home and complaining about it. You know, like you are really putting in the time and effort to build these relationships so that at the end of the day, your goals are met, and a good relationship is formed that will have longevity beyond just the project or your group's life. And these are just a list of like successful coalition tips. So this kind of just summarizes a lot of the stuff that we went over. So having someone dedicated to keep the outreach and contacts organized is really helpful, because there's always that, like, it's been 6 months, I can't find that person's email. What was the name of that person? Choosing unifying common issues to work on amongst everyone, setting realistic goals, you know, like trying to have a weekly meeting, totally unrealistic. Monthly, every other month, you know, that's a little bit more realistic, or quarterly even. Just being like honest, like agreeing to disagree. Like sometimes you're not going to agree on everything, but like focusing on your common agenda and not getting so derailed. You know, like a good example would be recently, like there was a huge debacle over a neighbor way. And at the end of the day, people were forgetting that everybody was on the same page, wanting the area to have traffic calming, but people were getting so focused on minute details that they were forgetting that everybody was on the same page of wanting traffic calming. Clarify your decision making carefully. A coalition needs to be crystal clear about what decisions will be made, help other organizations achieve their self-interest, and so that everybody feels like they're benefiting and not just being used. And make sure that you achieve real results. So you're not just involving people because you just want to talk, and like you're just a talker and you just want to have that friend or something. You know, you are in this together to you know, actually get a result. So like you really do want to show that like you are fixing your neighborhood, or you're actually working on this issue to, you know, change the hearts and minds of your neighborhood around whatever issue it is, you know, possibly specifically biking and walking, and making, you know, that better for your neighborhood and for all road users. But I will say that coalitions that try to ignore this are probably headed for trouble. So if you are not about having results, a lot of people will lose interest, or they might even just decide that being part of the coalition isn't worth their time since they're not seeing any results. And that is it. So right on time. Does anybody have any questions or anything? I can click back through this too if you would like to see any slides back on the screen.
So one thing I'm definitely thinking about is kind of how to find common ground with people when it might not seem like there is common ground, or maybe not necessarily that, but when you don't know too much about their group or what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about like groups that maybe are not interested in a bike lane, and I'd like to sort of figure out how to, like, I feel like personally, I think that a bike lane has something for everyone, even drivers, right? But trying to figure out kind of like, without having any connections necessarily to them, how to find some connections.
I mean, you could like when I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking of like just having a listening session where like, you know, they know that you're coming in with like the perspective of that, like you like bike lanes, you know, and you know that they're coming in with the perspective of not liking bike lanes, and maybe you have like a third party there to moderate, or you're just there to literally just listen to everybody's opinions and not come out with changing each other's minds, but you're just there to listen and talk about it. And through that, you'll at least get to like hear what each other has to say. And like if you set those expectations ahead of time, I think both parties would get something out of it. But you're also being upfront that like these are my opinions, so like I'm probably not going to you know, I'm probably not going to change it. And if they're coming in kind of with that, you might be able to at least just start the dialogue, because I think some relationships or perspectives, you know, ultimately take a long time to change, or just listen to people. Like listening is super important in relationships.
If I could add about that, Leah, I'm guessing you're probably talking about the Ellsworth bike lane. I know that there were some,
Yeah.
People who were concerned about the parking, and they were able to stop the bike lane, as I understand that, previously. And I think meeting with them, you're not likely to persuade them, but maybe thinking of it in terms of the goal here is not to persuade, but just to be present. What I've discovered in one particular incident was I went to a public meeting where a neighbor, someone who lives in Greenfield, went in with the intention, but she was obviously hot about too many bike lanes, and she was very concerned about too many bike lanes. And she came in fully expecting, I imagine, that the room would agree with her, because in her bubble, everyone she talks to agrees with her. So, but she showed up and there was a lot of bikers there. And you know, it was tense, I guess. But the fact is, I think it changed her perspective when she realized that her neighbors didn't necessarily agree with her. And so I think by showing up, having the conversation, you may not persuade them, but I'm wondering if maybe they think there is nobody who's interested in losing their parking in their neighborhood, and that if they find that neighbors like yourself wouldn't mind losing the parking in the neighborhood in exchange for a bike lane, they'll give them perspective that it's not just people from out of some other neighborhood who's trying to enforce this on them, that it's their actual neighbors. So it just sort of moves that perspective a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also, you know, like the point of coalition building is so that you have you can identify like within your neighborhood or within your groups like who is for or against certain things, and like, you know, maybe there is that person that is really good at talking to opposition, you know, or like whatever issue comes up, like you will have those people that you can call on or ask to do like, you know, some of this work that might have to happen. George, did you want to say something?
I don't know. I was trying to get in touch with people at Hazelwood Initiative with, I think, the ultimate goal of trying to see who in that community could we, maybe I'm wrong about this, Kat, but like we were trying to loop that community into our Greenfield pedestrian thing. And I guess that's part of coalition building. I just was like, how do I reach out? I actually found through a friend of a friend, the old executive director of HI gave me another contact to reach out to. So I'm just trying to figure out how do I do that. But I guess with the ultimate goal of just asking them like, hey, do you know, is there any kind of groups down there that I can get in contact with? I guess it's just going through a bunch of different steps to get there. But I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah, it's like it is hard to, sometimes it's hard and takes a long time to like find a contact because turnover and just, you know, neighborhoods are pretty organic. Like they change and people come and go and live their lives. So
yeah, I mean, George, to address that point, that's also been in the back of my mind, of course, during this whole entire session, not just them, but just our first meeting and conversation about like reaching out to other groups and whatnot. And I think it's more clear to me, having seen this presentation, so thank you, Anna, that like we're not really even quite ready to reach out to anybody yet until we have like our list of priorities and projects, with a few exceptions. I mean, and we can talk about this in our group. That's, I don't know, is that next week? But I mean, it still, I think, might be worthwhile to reach out to somebody at the Hazelwood Initiative, but we just need to be really clear about our message and just like introduce ourselves and say like, hey, we're a group of Greenfield neighbors. We're putting this together. Hazelwood also doesn't have a bike ped group. So if your organization or anybody else in your neighborhood is interested in joining us, I think that's a pretty clear ask of just sort of like introducing ourselves, but there's not going to be too many groups, I think, that we're going to want to do that with yet. I mean, I don't know if you guys have any feedback on that, but I think listening to this presentation today just sort of like solidifies that in my mind, that that's where we're at in terms of reaching out to other groups in Greenfield and Hazelwood.
Gotcha.
I agree with that we should have a specific project that we're working on and then reach out with that specific ask. That said, there are some, at the beginning of the slideshow, there was the permanent coalitions that I imagine the GCA could be someone we just constantly keep in touch with. And I think perhaps the Hazelwood Initiative could also be that, without any specific project. But if we get like a specific project, like a bike to school day, that's when we get in touch with the school. We don't get in touch with the school until we have the project, until we have a plan, or if we're going to, something like that, we need to have something specific to ask.
yeah, you understood my message.
Yeah, and George and Andrew, I don't know. I mean, again, not to hijack this and make a Greenfield meeting here, but if we want to just put together even like, and I don't mind drafting it and we can talk about this, but just sort of like a form letter, more or less, for these sort of like evergreen connections of people that we want to introduce ourselves to and maybe sort of like semi-recruit from, like, and in particular, I'm thinking Hazelwood because we connect to them and they don't have a group either. I think it could be like really lightweight and just sort of like a nice way of just like making our presence known, even if we don't have like a hard ask yet, and just use the same form letter for the handful of groups that we might identify as sort of like evergreen partners.
Yeah, I will say like one topic of coalition building that I didn't dive into because I just wanted to keep it more on like external stakeholders who you would like to, form relationships with, but like another way to coalition build is just internal. So like external is like, your church, your school group, your community group, but internal coalition building would be like, how can we better form relationships like in our group so that like everybody feels like their personal strengths and weaknesses are being used to the best ability, that everybody is contributing, so nobody feels left out of a group. Like I know George, you'd mentioned at the beginning, like, I don't know what I'm doing, like I'm kind of like lost. And like Andrew's like, yeah, I just decided to join my own community group on my own. And like Catherine, you said that you used to be involved, like in your group in San Francisco when you lived there. And like Leigh, I know like we went over strengths and weaknesses at like one of the very first meetings of Shady Side ever. But like just, making sure that internally for like your own little coalition of just people, like that you are as strong as you can be internally, so that like externally that also shows, that you are strong as a group while you're looking for those external relationships. And with that, if you have any last thoughts, it is 7:09. So if anybody has anything else to add, say it now or forever hold
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you all for attending.
Yeah,
I really
thanks. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
It's really great.
well.
I'm just thinking like it might be useful to do a mini version of this just with the Shady Side group about a specific project.
Yeah, I can definitely do that.
You kind of used our project anyway, so.
I looked at the list, so.
What's that?
I looked at the attendance list, so I was trying to figure it to a real world example that I knew was happening.
Yeah, because I feel like that one has been like on the back of all our minds for a long time, and it feels like now it might be coming up again. So I've definitely been thinking about what we can do to make it happen. So I think hopefully for our next meeting, I don't know. Anyway, we should probably talk more about it before then. I think we have another couple of weeks. But yeah, I think it would be helpful to share with the group.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I'll be in touch with all of you. See you Greenfielders next week, and Leah the week after. So
yeah,
talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Nice meeting you
Thanks.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.